Hello, Esther, and welcome to the Naked Eye podcast. It's nice to
Hi,
have you.
Nathan.
You want to take a moment to introduce yourself in your own words, a little bit about who you are and what you do, and maybe even how you got into the whole vision field.
Okay, so my name is Esther Joy van der Werf. I'm from the Netherlands, and I used to be nearsighted. As a teenager, things began to get blurry in the distance. Obviously, my parents noticed, sent me to an eye doctor, and the typical thing, I got a pair of glasses for myopia. Mild myopia, which typically is the first pair of glasses, is fairly mild. And these glasses, I was excited about getting them at first. I thought they would make me look more intelligent. And I was disappointed there. Plus, of course, you get all these questions in school, right? I was still in school, in college, and everybody asking, so what's up with your eyes? And why do you need glasses? And I found it embarrassing instead of being cool.
Hmm.
And the other thing was that the glasses made me feel separate from the world. Like I had this barrier between me and everybody else. And that was the hardest part. That was the part I could not get used to. And I ended up just saying, oh, forget it. And I just took them off and threw them away and didn't use them again. And I made do in this blurry world with a fair amount of squinting and a fair amount of straining. And slowly over the years, that slightly blurry vision got ever so slightly worse. Not hugely, and it took years. Typically, if you do start wearing glasses, it gets worse quicker. So
Right.
my advantage was that over those 16 years that I didn't wear glasses and didn't know how to see with clarity, that I didn't go too much backwards. So it was a very slow deterioration. But at some point in that 16 years, I was like, I should try and do something about this.
Right.
And there was an article in the British paper, the Daily Mail, that I read at the time, an article about the Bates method. And I went, oh, there's eye exercises I could do? That's great, I'll try that. So I bought the book that they recommended and started these eye exercises. And it was all, the near to far and rolling the eyes in all directions, the typical, move your eyes on purpose eye exercises.
Yeah.
And it was terribly boring. And after several weeks of trying it, it just didn't do anything for me. And I didn't have the discipline to continue at that point. If there's no results and I'm not enjoying it, I'm going to quit.
Yeah.
And I did. So that was somewhere when I was about 25. And then in my early 30s, I came across Tom Quackenbush at an expo in San Francisco. And he was selling his brand new book at that time, Relearning to See, the big encyclopedia type of book.
Yeah.
And so I was skeptical at that time. When I saw him in his book, I was like, yeah, right, I've tried this before. And, I just didn't really believe it could work, but I was curious enough because by then, this is 16 years after my blurry vision started, by then my vision was bad enough that I was like, oh man, I'm going to have to give in and get glasses really soon because I'm not safe on the freeways anymore.
Yeah.
So for that reason, I had a little chat with Tom. And he said, well, this isn't about eye exercises. It's all about relaxing how you see. It's, you shouldn't be staring at the computer and this and that. And we just had a little conversation. And he made it sound different enough that I thought, okay, it's worth getting this big book that was $35. I don't think I'd ever spent that much money on a book before.
Yeah.
Anyway, got the book. And months later, I finally took time to read it, tried it out. It took about 2 weeks to read the book. And at the end of the 2 weeks, I had progressed from 2050 to 2020 vision. And that was such a nice surprise because I didn't really expect to get to clarity. I didn't think it was possible. I just hoped I wouldn't get any worse.
Yeah.
From that point on. And then to get clarity, wow, that's amazing. But it wasn't the same kind of clarity I remembered having as a teenager. I got to 2020, but 2020 was readable but blurry, and I just remembered better vision as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
But I was happy with what I had, and a little upset and a little angry that nobody told me that this was possible. and that it was so easy, right? 2 weeks to get back to clarity. Why didn't I notice when I was 18, you know, 16?
Right, yeah, 16 years ago.
So anyway, I ended up trying it out on my boyfriend at that time, and he was much more nearsighted than me and made huge progress. In the space of 1 month, he went from not seeing the eye chart to one line away from passing the driver's test. So just the mild blurry vision that I had is what he ended up with. And I was like, wow, you know, it doesn't just work for my bit of blurry vision, but it works for somebody with -4 and astigmatism who's been wearing glasses for years.
Yeah.
And that surprised me too. And I was like, well, geez, you know, the world should know about this. But the first thing I did was write a thank you note to Tom Quackenbush. And he then called and invited me to come to teacher training that year, which was the summer of 2000. And so I went to teacher training, and it was a group of 7 of us that went through that training that summer. And it was really interesting. And I ended up, you know, not doing anything else since then. That's the only work I've done since then. It's like I've been a full-time vision teacher for the last 18 years. And
Awesome.
I love it. It's so much better than what I did before, which was a typical office job, you know, paper pushing office job.
Yeah.
Highly paid, but this is way more fun and more satisfying. So,
nice. Yeah. Pays off in other ways.
Absolutely. Yes, it does.
That's really cool.
That's my story.
And I wonder, what I'm intrigued about is how the first time around with sort of the eye exercise approach, maybe you had more expectations, like you had something in mind of what you wanted to achieve, but it didn't work. And then the second time around, you had like no expectations of getting the improvements, and then it happened.
That's very true, but I don't think that was what made the difference. I think the actual approach is what made it.
Exactly. Yeah, because it was a totally different emphasis on physical exercise versus more of the relaxation component. But that's just something, I brought that up because that's something that I dealt with, and a lot of my students deal with, is that desire for the results, or sometimes wanting the improvements or expecting the improvements sometimes is not relaxing. That kind of takes you away from the whole relaxation component and kind of is a form of stress or strain.
To some extent, I don't have that problem too much. There's a few students that are too eager and try too hard. But most people that come to me, I find that, you know, I help them relax. That's what I do. That's my job. And so as I help them relax, and then the vision part becomes a playful little part of that. And before they know it, they see 1, 2, 3 lines more on the chart, and they surprise themselves.
Yeah.
And then it's like, wow, this obviously is possible. And then their motivation increases to stick with it. But also they understand at that point that not trying to see is what creates the better vision. Because that's how they achieved their first improvement, by not trying.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I love the paradoxical nature of all this stuff, the kind of Zen koan nature of the less you try, the more you see, those kinds of things.
Exactly. And that's so true. It's so true.
And also beyond vision. I mean, that concept oftentimes applies to other areas of our life as well. So I also like how some of the vision stuff can teach us lessons about other aspects of our life.
I agree. Teaching vision is so much more than just teaching vision. It kind of spreads out into the ripple effect into your life, right?
And I had the same exact revelation that you had. Sounds like it took me longer to understand this than you did, but after over 10 years of wearing glasses, I started to feel like at first they felt like they were connecting me more with the world because I could see the world better, but I did reach a point where I actually felt what you described of they were like barriers in between me and the world. So although I could see the world clearly, it was almost like I was more distanced from it or disconnected from it, specifically when I was like talking to people. Like when I would be having a conversation with somebody, especially like a meaningful conversation or like a deep conversation, I always had this urge before I learned about any of this vision stuff or bait stuff, is to just take the glasses off so that I could connect with them on, even if they got blurrier, I felt like I was able to really focus on them and pay attention to them and be there with them in a more present way than talking to them with glasses on.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. It's like I don't know, there's an energetic
Yeah.
component to it, I would say, where to really be with somebody, there shouldn't be the glass between you and them.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
That was my feeling. And I guess not everybody feels that way, but I certainly did. And a lot of my students do. So
Hmm.
nice to get rid of that. Very nice.
I know. Yeah, it is. It's a good feeling.
And we both speak from personal experience, which can't beat that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of sounded maybe more like your boyfriend at the time in your story, because I was almost -4 for myopia and with astigmatism as well, which I was hoping to be sort of, I guess, the theme of part of our talk today is exploring astigmatism in particular, because there is some confusion around that. And Dr. Bates, whenever you read some of his original material, talks extensively about refractive errors, including astigmatism, but he's often referring more to myopia, presbyopia, hyperopia. So yeah, and I know that you've done a lot of work on studying astigmatism and finding ways to prevent it and reverse it. So I'd love to pick your brain a little bit about that, specifically on some of the work from Elliot Forrest, the eye doctor who presents more of a functional understanding of astigmatism versus it just being totally random or genetic. Yeah, maybe this will be a good sort of segue or way to shift gears into that topic. If you maybe want to introduce us to Elliot Forrest and maybe begin to explain, we can kind of talk a little bit more in depth about
Sure.
what astigmatism is, what causes it, and we can start brainstorming to help people figure out ways, if they have astigmatism, to start to get rid of it.
Yeah, because there is a huge amount of confusion, I guess, is part of it, but misunderstanding. There seems to be mystery attached to astigmatism. People don't understand it at all. Even eye doctors barely understand it. When I started looking into it, I started asking eye doctors. When I went to conferences, optometry conferences, I would ask, can you explain astigmatism to me? And 9 out of 10 of these eye doctors would say, don't ask me.
Ask somebody else.
Please go somewhere else. That's just too much of a confusing topic. And I was surprised that they couldn't explain it to me. But there was one or two that could, to some extent. But their explanation involves mostly how they put it in the lens and how the eye misshapes and how that looks and how the lens can compensate for that. But nobody really explained or could explain why the eye misshaped that way or the cornea misshaped that way. And so I just kept searching, and at some point, and I forget how, but I did a lot of research at university libraries, and probably at some point I came across this article from Dr. Elliot Forrest, an optometrist who had done some study here in my hometown of Ojai. And it was years ago, and he's no longer alive, so I never got to meet him in person. So I don't really know what he was like, other than from hearing from one of his patients who I happen to be friends with. And so my friend had Elliot Forrest as his eye doctor from a very young age, when he was first diagnosed with vision problems, until he was 18 or 19. Mm-hmm. And he feels Elliot Forrest was not an easy man to get along with and didn't do his eyes any good. So my impression of Elliot Forrest is that he was nothing like Dr. Bates, didn't have that real understanding of the eyes, but he studied astigmatism cases over years, a longitudinal study. Mm-hmm. And in that study, he made some discoveries that for some reason nobody else has bothered to really continue with. Other than Paul Harris, Dr. Paul Harris. He's an optometrist who's still teaching. And he has continued that work a little bit, but mainly it seems to have been ignored by eye doctors. And that's a shame, because the one thing about Forrest was that he helped me make sense of astigmatism that nobody had been able to do for me before then. Yeah. And so his research into this, longitudinal research into the causes of astigmatism, what he basically did was he used all his patients here in Ohio and probably local area who had astigmatism, and then he would check over the years as it changed, if it got increasing stronger diopters, or if the axis changed, then he wondered why. And he would ask them a ton of questions. And a pattern emerged. And that's the interesting part. A pattern emerged with these people that changed their astigmatism. And he found that how they used their eyes, as in relation to how they used their head, was a big component of astigmatism. So there is a, you can, as in eye exercises, you can let your eyes do a lot of moving, or the Bates way, you can let your head follow along as you move. And if you do that eye scanning habit, where it's just your eyes moving, say, for example, left to right, and your head doesn't follow, but when you're doing the up and down, your head does follow, then what Forrest discovered is you get an imbalance. Sorry, I need to use my little eyeballs here. You get an imbalance in the extraocular eye muscles, the recti, these four muscles that are there to move your eyes around. So if the left and right do a lot of work, but up and down get to the advantage of the head moving along, then these muscles develop a different tone. And as the tone changes of the muscles, they can actually pull differently on this very soft tissue of the eye. And that then changes the shape of the eye, or the shape of the cornea. So if these two horizontal ones are tighter, they end up pulling the cornea into a longer shape horizontally. And it's called with the rule astigmatism. So if you have 180 degrees, that's 180-degree axis. If you have that kind of astigmatism, then very likely you have a habit of not moving your head when you're looking left and right. You're just doing that with your eyes. So that was one of the correlations he found. And obviously there is the opposite one. If you tend to just move up and down like this, but left and right, you let your head come along, then it's the opposite problem. And if you do both ways the same, either both ways with the head following or both ways just with the eyes, then there's less chance of astigmatism forming because they're still in balance, right?
Yeah, all the four muscles are more equally toned.
Yeah, exactly. So, but there are other things that contribute, like your posture. There's so many people that hang their head to one side or the other.
Yeah,
and
head tilters.
or that have, and this specifically happens with glasses. If you have the reader glasses and you have these people that end up wearing the glasses a lot, but then can't see the distance through them, and readers are sitting down here, so they look over the top.
Yeah,
right?
so they kind of
now
drop
they have their chin down and they're getting up. And that causes astigmatism at various angles, like one this way, one the other way. And the same if you have a habit with a tense neck and you just end up looking down a lot, or you have a nice posture this way, but all your work is down and you don't bother to put your head down. So if the gaze is down compared to where your facial plane is, then again, you create an astigmatism. So those are things that Forrest discovered and put on paper for everybody to just look up and see. I'm going, oh my gosh, now it makes total sense. And when I first read that, I was like, okay, who do I have in my list of students that has a very specific astigmatism that I can compare to what Forrest kind of concluded, and then ask them. So I sent an email to a few friends and students and said, look, I just read this paper by this eye doctor that I've never met. I'm just wondering how true it is.
Yeah.
And for example, one of the people I wrote to was a friend in Amsterdam, and he had a horizontal astigmatism. So I said, according to Forrest, you probably have the habit of reading or moving your eyes left to right without your head following. His reply back was, well, that's funny. I was reading your email and I had my head leaning on my fist as I read your email. Yes, I guess I have to say you're right. I don't move my head when it's leaning on my fist.
Well, yeah, so he was literally holding it in place.
Yes. So he became aware of this habit. Once you become aware that that causes astigmatism at that angle that you have it, then you can change it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not aware of the cause, there's no way you can change it.
Yeah, so when you were just describing those two main causes of the head use versus the eye use and the posture, it really just got me thinking that people have to be really aware of how they're using their eyes at work, at school, at home, when they're driving, when maybe they hadn't really been thinking about their eyes in that activity. It's just sort of on autopilot.
Yeah, well, that's most of the problems that people have. They have these strained habits that they're not aware of, that are creating vision problems.
Mm-hmm.
And we as teachers are there to point those out and say, well, you're doing this all the time. Have you realized, do you know why you're doing this? Can we see if we can change that? So, that's what we're there to help them become aware of. And then once you're aware, and repeat the awareness until, every time you become aware, you purposely change it. And then if you keep doing that, eventually the old habit dies and the new habit replaces it. The relaxed.
Right. So it's not just being like, oh, I'm aware that I'm resting my head on my fist and I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm going to keep doing it. You would say, oh, I'm doing this again. I'm going to get my head off of my fist and start moving my head as I read.
Exactly. Well, there's a subtle difference though, and this is the moving your head as you read is very easily made into another strain. So I'm always careful with that one and say, don't purposely move your head, but do release your neck and give your head the freedom to move. Because that purposely moving the head that I see a lot of people do is another strain, right? That's not how we're meant to be using our eyes and our head. It's, the order of motion doesn't come from either conscious motion of eyes. It doesn't come from conscious motion of the head. It comes from, where is my attention? Because where my attention is, that point of attention, that's what leads my eyes. And as my eyes are led away to a different point of attention, then my head wants to follow, if the neck is loose.
Right.
Okay. And in that order, the attention, then the eyes, then the head, you don't create strain. You change that order, you create strain and eye problems. That was very much a Bates thing. And Elliot Forrest didn't really go into the Bates way of looking at it. He tried to cure people with eye exercises. And I think that's not so successful. And maybe that's why nobody ever really dug into it deeper, because they felt like it wasn't working so well.
Yeah.
But if you combine the two, the knowledge of Forrest and the results he came up with the knowledge of Dr. Bates, now you have something very valuable.
That's what I was just going to say is coming at it from your background and looking at it through the Bates method lens, pun intended, that's really what makes it the most powerful, because you know what's causing it, understanding the cause of the problem, and now you have these more relaxed ways to approach it and reverse it.
Exactly.
So before we talk a little bit more about additional suggestions of ways to reverse it, if we just rewind and backtrack a little bit, you mentioned a couple things that not everybody might be familiar with, things on the prescription of the glasses, like the sphere, the cylinder, and the axis. Because some people may actually have astigmatism in their glasses and not know they have astigmatism. So if you have glasses, if you have contacts, if you have a prescription, it usually has those three numbers, the first one being the sphere, which is a minus or plus number for nearsightedness or farsightedness. Then those second two numbers are the astigmatism numbers. So could you explain those, the cylinder and the axis?
The cylinder is the compensation that they put into the lens to make up for the fact that you have a differently shaped cornea. So if I go back to that example from earlier with the horizontal astigmatism, if these two muscles are a little tight and they're pulling this eye into a longer shape that pulls on the cornea, creating that longer axis here and a flatter axis and a steeper one here, then what the eye doctor is going to do is put a cylinder shape in your lens at that angle. And the diopter of the cylinder corresponds to however much you've misshapen the cornea with the pulling of the muscles. So the diopter is the strength, the power level of that cylinder compensation. And the axis number is just where in the eye do they put that. And it can be anything from 0 to 180 degrees. So those two numbers always go together. If you have one, you have another. If you have a cylinder, there has to be an axis number, and you can't have an axis number and no zero cylinder. That just doesn't exist.
Right.
You have one and the other. They always come together, and together they combine into your astigmatism numbers. And just look at your prescription, see if there's anything in the column of cylinder and axis, and then you know whether you have astigmatism or not. And if you don't have a prescription, then you can look at a typical astigmatism chart, a wheel with spokes, and all the black spokes should look more or less equally black and clear. or equally blurry, depending on your current level of vision.
Yeah.
But if for some reason, say the horizontals are particularly blurry, but the verticals are particularly clear and blacker, and just just look more like a straight line with no wavy edges at all, then you have an astigmatism that's at that horizontal axis. Okay.
So that would be like somewhere approximately like 180-degree axis.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So that's more the horizontal astigmatism. And then if it was a vertical astigmatism where
then the vertical lines will be seen more blurry and the horizontal lines will be seen clearer. And then you have a vertical astigmatism.
And that would be like 90-degree axis.
That's a 90-degree axis. But it can be anything. It could be 87, it could be 45, it could be anything.
Yeah.
And that's a combination of muscles pulling that create a different angle. Mm-hmm. So, typically if you have a 10-degree angle of your head to the left, then your astigmatism will be, instead of at 90, it will be at 70 or 80 or somewhere in that range.
Yeah. Yeah, because the four muscles you were pointing out, the recti muscles, they're attached north, south, east, and west of each eye. And it's not always like equal tension. So it's not always like a clean astigmatism, I guess, of like perfectly horizontally or perfectly vertically. It can be kind of diagonally or can kind of change depending on that imbalanced use of those muscles.
Yeah, it depends on the neck tension. It depends on the posture of the head, where that angle is going to end up being.
Yeah, and it can change a lot too.
Yes, especially if you haven't yet worn glasses for it. It's a very changeable number. Some people say that they've been to an eye doctor several times in a row over a period of just a few weeks, and find that astigmatism number, either the cylinder or the axis, but certainly the axis, can wildly change in a short period. But people that have worn glasses with astigmatism compensations in them tend to have that more steady number, where say that it's 170, then maybe the next year at 171 or 169, and it just kind of balances around that. And it's the reason it kind of becomes more steady is because having that cylinder in that lens means the eye has to keep that same level of tension in order to see clearly through that lens. So it gets encouraged to hold the strain in the same way.
Yeah, it's encouraging that imbalanced tone of the muscles, I guess.
Yeah, and reinforces it.
Yeah. So do you find that when people start taking their glasses off after wearing them for 5, 10, 15 years with astigmatism correction, that it stays around the same angle, or does it start to once again kind of fluctuate more like it did before the glasses, or?
That's a good question. Don't really know. I don't think I keep track of that.
Right, yeah.
And I have no reason to. It depends. If they go into lower prescriptions, which most people do to begin with, and depending on the level of astigmatism, if it's more than 2 diopters, then cutting it out completely isn't feasible. So you go down to a lower cylinder, but you keep the same axis. And so if you're doing the stepping down, then the axis isn't probably going to change much.
Right, yeah. Yeah, sometimes the way that I think about it is, since like more just the basic nearsightedness and farsightedness, where and maybe it is more of an equal tension in the muscles, where it's just creating the too short or the too long shape of the eyeball for just blur. The astigmatism seems like it's a little bit more unbalanced, and there's unequal tension around the eyes. So when you start working on releasing it, it almost seems like it's like an unwinding of this tension that could make the angle of it fluctuate. And just thinking back on my own experience, when I was working on my astigmatism, I wasn't going back for multiple eye exams to check the axis, but I was seeing through my eyes the astigmatic image, which is like the double image or like the shadowy ghost image on my eye chart. It would move around the real letter within just a couple of seconds. One line, it would be directly above, the next line would be directly below, and then sometimes it would be diagonally up to the right, diagonally down to the left. And so that to me was like I was witnessing my axis, my astigmatism kind of rotating around the eye as the muscles were kind of unwinding that tension, since I was finally taking my glasses off and giving them a little bit more wiggle room to kind of figure out how to work.
Exactly. And if you look at an astigmatism chart, when you're working with this, you will find there too that you look at it for a minute, and in that minute, you'll see the lines changing all over the place. Because I think in some ways the astigmatism chart creates its own tension. I really
sometimes eye charts can too, yeah.
And eye charts definitely do.
Yeah.
So you have to really work on that with a student in helping them become more relaxed with it and looking at it more as a feedback mechanism rather than a test of any kind.
Right.
Both with the charts for the regular letter chart and the astigmatism wheel chart.
Yeah, I actually had a lesson with a student this morning, and even just thinking about the eye chart with the eyes closed created that strain and tension and fear. And you know, one thing I like to do is have people work on their visualization, their imagination, their memory. And I was having to remember a word or a letter a certain size, and kept asking her to make it smaller and smaller to sort of emulate going down on the eye chart, and it wouldn't get small. Like, it stayed at a certain size because there was a fear or a strain associated with just looking at small letters in the distance. So it's so interesting how mental it all can be.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you brought up the astigmatism chart though, because that was one of my questions I wanted to ask is, if people aren't sure if they have astigmatism, or if they don't have a copy of their prescription, if there is a way that they can check themselves at home using some sort of chart. So maybe I'll be able to include like a self-astigmatism chart in the show notes that people can download and print out and use, just to kind of do a generalized test, just to see how the horizontal lines versus the vertical lines versus the diagonal lines look.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that's without glasses, just looking at it with the naked eye. Do you find that astigmatism changes depending on distance as well? Because for me, yeah, my astigmatism was much more pronounced in the distance versus up close.
Yep.
So if you do test it at home, you might want to try it at different distances, holding it close, far.
Yeah. Typically for myopia, if you hold it close enough, that doesn't appear to be astigmatism. If you hold it in the blur zone, it's like, oh, all of a sudden it does show up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and you must check one eye at a time, cover the other. You can't do this with two eyes together. So
yeah,
put that in your notes.
That's a good point, because yeah, thinking back, I only had astigmatism prescribed in my left eye, mm-hmm. Not in my right.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you want to check for astigmatism, you cannot do that with both eyes together. It has to be one eye at a time. Because like you say, one eye may have it, the other not. And then if you do both eyes together, you say, yeah, I have astigmatism, but you can't tell which eye.
Yeah.
You have to do that one eye at a time, because each eye can be different angle. It's not that both eyes have the same angle.
Right. Yeah, actually, the majority of astigmatism I see in my students, it's always a different axis for the left eye and the right eye. If people know they have astigmatism, or they think they might have it, what are some of the main suggestions of what to do about it? I mean, you already brought up two huge things of paying attention to your vision habits of your eye scan versus your head scan. So how you're moving your eyes horizontally compared to vertically, versus moving your head with your eyes, using them, moving together as a team, and also your posture during different activities. Any other brainstorming things of what people can start to do about it?
The main thing with astigmatism is neck tension. If you have neck tension, chances are you have astigmatism. So that releasing that neck is the most important part, and all the rest flows out of that. How you move your head with your eyes doesn't come naturally if you have neck tension. Mm-hmm. Then you get this forced motion. Oh yeah, Esther told me to move my head.
But it hurts really bad.
No, that's not it. You must release the neck, and if you have this, typical head slant, then there too, it's tension here that pulls the head to the left all the time. Mm-hmm. So releasing that, and maybe just doing the opposite for a little while, so this gets a chance to release. Like if you become aware of this, every time your awareness comes to it, go, okay, let's do this. And that will, start to allow you to balance out, because you release this side more and more. So it really is
tilting left, you tilt right.
Yeah.
And then eventually, I mean, you want to hold the head up straight for most things, but as a way to kind of counteract or kind of break that habit?
No, I'm not saying you hold up your head straight, because that again, it sounds like tension to me. That's like
Yeah.
saying sit up straight, and everybody goes, "Oh, military straight posture."
Right,
There's
exactly.
nothing relaxed about that.
Yeah.
No, your head needs to be free, your neck needs to be free, and so it'll do this every once in a while. But if you don't have tension and rigidity with what you're doing, you will not develop astigmatism. If you do something with tension and rigidity, that's where the astigmatism falls into it. And that's one of the things that Elliot Forrest did say in his research too. Those that were given exercises to undo their astigmatism were not successful if they did their exercises with tension and rigidity. That just did not work. So you have to allow, you have to release rather than do things, right? Most everything in the Bates method is about undoing. Just learning to not do as much, but just release and let things come, let things happen, and get out of this trying habit, this must-do habit. That's not it. Seeing isn't doing. Seeing is receiving. And if you don't get that basic level, then whatever you do is going to just create more tension, and you'll never get to clarity. So you have to get to this understanding of I must let go in order to improve. And that's the main key to the whole method.
I think you just shared the biggest key right there of you can reverse astigmatism correctly and incorrectly. There's a right way to do it and a wrong way.
Well,
And,
no, there isn't. There's not a wrong way to do it, because then you don't reverse it.
right, exactly. That's what I mean. Is because you can read the same explanation of it, or hear you explain it in this audio form, and you could go two ways with it. You could kind of like how you were explaining, oh, Esther told me to do this, so I'm going to force myself to do this, and in a militaristic, rigid sort of eye exercise fashion, and it'll
it backfires. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, so it's becoming aware of your vision habits, your vision use, and encouraging some more balanced use in a natural, soft, receiving, allowing way.
Becoming aware of where your specific strains are, your tensions, and that's very much a Bates thing. Yeah. Bates always said that all your vision problems are due to strain. And there's a million ways to strain. And you have to find out what you are doing, how you are straining, that creates your vision problem. And only when finding that strain can you then become aware, and can you then release. And then vision clears up magically by itself. There's no doing, it's just allowing. And I keep hammering on that with my students, saying, no, don't do. Anything you do is probably wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's sort of the nature of a student asking a teacher. It's like, all right, what do I do? Like,
yeah, I do that a lot, and I don't want them to do. I want them to become aware and release. And yeah, some people love that, and others go, but I need my exercises. I need my list for the day.
Yeah, exactly. That's
There
right.
is no such thing. There is just building of awareness. And your problem is maybe you like blinking, maybe you have that head tilt. So your problem is become aware of when you don't blink, and become aware of when that head tilts. And then each time you notice it, you change. Purposely change out of it. Blink a lot instead. For the 30-second rapid blinking technique is the ideal one if you have the staring habit. And just every time you're aware, just do that. Every time you find your head tilting, you're like, oh, darn, did it again. Let's massage that side a little bit, and maybe drop to the other side for a moment so I can release here, and then come back to balance. Until at some point I find I did it again, right? And off goes that head to the side again. And that habit, you just keep interrupting, interrupt until it stops by itself.
Yeah.
And then, the astigmatism goes and the neck tension goes. And then you're back to seeing with clarity, and you won't have that tendency anymore.
Yeah, and the same thing goes for the general refractive errors, nearsightedness, farsightedness too, because that was a really big procedure for me with my myopia, was continually catching myself squinting or straining or staring, becoming aware of it, doing something to change it, and then until the next time I caught myself straining it, and it wasn't very much. The strain was very subtle. Like sometimes I like to describe it on like a percentage scale, like 0 to 100. It was never like 100%. I was never like squeezing my eyes super hard and straining a lot mentally. It was usually like 5 or 10 or 15%, like really low on the scale. So it was sort of there in the background. I didn't even know I was carrying it around. Once I paid more attention to it, then I could start to catch the subtle straining, and something like a head tilt it sort of falls in that category. It's something that you know, don't notice. Maybe somebody has to actually point it out to you, like, hey, your head is a little tilted, or
Exactly, very much so. It helped me a lot when I first learned this, to have somebody that said, "Hey, you're staring again."
yeah,
Hello,
yeah,
waving his hand in front of my face. Like, oh, darn it. Becoming aware is the hardest part, I
yeah.
think.
Hmm.
And once you get past that, then you can change, and it becomes easy. But building the awareness is a key. So,
I was talking to one of my students who's a dentist, and she works all day looking down in people's mouths. And the way that they are trained in dental school is the dentist is on one side of the patient, the dental assistant is on the other side. And that never changes unless the dentist is left-handed. And the dentist has to be on the other side. And then the
mhm.
dental assistant gets angry about that because they're not used to it. They get out of their routine and everything. Because I was talking to her about the Elliott Forrest concept of thinking about your profession, like how do you use your head at work and your eyes at work. And so we were talking about her day as a dentist. I was like, well, is there any chance that you could sit on the other side? And she's like, no, that's out of the
Out of the
question.
question. Mhm.
And so it's like, well, you know, in that case, you just have to pay attention to how you're sitting, because it's kind of a natural position to be kind of leaned over somebody. You have to have your head tilted, maybe. Um, Not to mention sometimes they have those, like, you know, magnifying glasses to wear. But yeah, you know, everybody listening, just kind of think about what you do at work, or if you're a student, what you do at school in your different classes, and just pay attention. Like, you don't have to even change anything the first couple days. Just notice what you're already doing, what your habits are, and take note of it so that you know what to start to change and what to start to modify. I mean, might be surprised at what you find out. You might learn some things about yourself, or how you go about your day and your activities and stuff.
Exactly. And once you've got some awareness of how you typically sit and stand and do your work or do your school stuff, then you know you can slowly build some changes into that. Create a little bit more distance if you're one of those that leans over the desk and writes with, you know, inches between you and the paper. And whatever it is, again, like your dental assistant, if you sit there and have this posture with a level of strain and rigidity, it'll create vision problems. But not every dental assistant needs glasses, so there must be a way of doing the same thing that is way more relaxed.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's, you know, do the relaxed way, and it'll
Sounds
help
like,
not just your astigmatism, but your vision and your posture and everything.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it just really goes to show how habitual all this stuff can be, and how when you start to do it a little bit differently, it can really kind of shatter those old ways of doing things. I remember since my vision was blurry in the distance, one of the first things I started to change my habits was just holding my cell phone like an inch or two farther away than I normally did, or my books that I was reading.
Right.
Because it before, I just had no awareness of it. I would just automatically put it at the same distance and hold it there for the whole time I was using it. And even when I started to hold it a little bit farther away, it would slowly creep back to the original position, because it was just so ingrained and so habitual. So it takes time to, you know, make these changes and learn these new habits.
It also takes a little acceptance of blurriness, because we, you know, like with you and your cell phone, you want to bring it closer because that's where the clarity is.
Yes.
And there's a discomfort in doing things that's in your blur zone. So a learning to accept there is some blurry vision as you're learning to improve. You have to deal with that, work with that blurry vision without fighting it. And as you just get more and more comfortable with that little bit of blur, then that blur can go. And then you're extending your clarity zone. Yeah,
So that's
so
kind of like an example of doing the same thing in a relaxed way versus a strained way. Because if you're holding it in the blur zone, but you're resisting it and you're constantly like, oh, there's something wrong, I need to be changing this, then that's kind of strain and tension involved, versus allowing it to be a little blurry and staying relaxed and maintaining good vision habits, breathing, blinking and stuff, to actually get the result that you want.
yeah, exactly. So just build ease into everything and acceptance. And that's what the Bates method really is about when you boil it down to it.
Yeah, this has been great. I've definitely, because I remember when I asked my eye doctor about my astigmatism to kind of explain it to me a little bit, my myopia and astigmatism, their answer was just like, oh, well, they gave the typical football response. They said, well, if you have astigmatism, your eye is kind of more shaped like a football.
Yep.
And that didn't mean anything to me.
How did it get that way?
So yeah, the way you explained it is so much better, of the imbalanced use, how that makes the left and the right recti muscles, or the top and the bottom recti muscles, pull more than the others, or some sort of imbalance there that creates that kind of football shape.
Yep.
And then that explanation also doesn't just leave us with our, shoulders shrugged. It leaves us with, okay, now we know what's causing it. What can we maybe do about it to balance out the eye muscles and change the habits that are creating that tension and that imbalance in the first place? It was the same thing with myopia. It's like, oh, if you're nearsighted, your eyeball's too long. And once again, that didn't mean much to me, because it's like, oh, well, I guess I was just born with that, or I don't know why I have this defective part. And so I think that's really what Bates did, is he kind of turned that period at the end of that statement into a comma, and it said, your eyeball's too long because of the strain and these bad vision habits, and let's see what we can do about it to maybe influence
exactly. Yeah, there should not be a period at the end of that sentence.
Right. Yeah.
You're absolutely right if you're putting it that way. Yeah, there's a lot to explain, and a lot that typical eye doctors just don't explain, and very often they don't know. It's not their way of understanding it. So that's why people like us are so needed and so important in changing this paradigm and helping people realize that there is a way out. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to take years. It's just building awareness and learning to release the tension that's been there for however many years you've had that. So it's not impossible. It's never impossible. Just it takes some willingness to explore and play around with new ways of seeing.
How can people find more about you and what you do, and some of your other expertise? Because I know that your practice goes well beyond helping people with astigmatism. You help people with all kinds of vision problems. So where can people go to learn a little bit more about you?
I have a website, visionsofjoy.org. And I sell books and products to help. And I teach a lot of classes, private classes, email course, video class. So there's a lot of ways to learn from me. But the website is a good place to start. It has a lot of free information. Yeah. So click ahead on visionsofjoy.org and just find what you need and take it from there.
I remember when I was first kind of beginning my vision journey, your website was a really, really helpful resource for me. Just a ton of articles, information to help me find what I needed at that time. And I even remember.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah. So definitely check her website out. I'll add a link to it in the show notes. You've got a wonderful website. I like it.
Thank you. And I'm glad you became a teacher and are out there promoting this work. That's awesome. It's the more the better as far as I'm concerned, because we're way outnumbered by the optometrists that are pretty much saying the opposite of what we do. So
yeah, I looked up the figure. I think the most recent figure, I like to kind of keep tracks of the optical industry. And the most recent figure, I think it was like $95 billion a year industry.
Yeah, so we have some catching up to do.
Yeah, we do. Yes, we do. Yeah.
But that'll change. They make that much money because they're way overcharged on the glasses, and the glasses don't need to be that expensive, and people are learning about that. There's no need for a pair of glasses to cost $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 and more, when an iPhone costs less than $100, right? Yeah. With all its technology. That's the kind of comparison I like. And you can get glasses for $30 on the internet. Mm-hmm. So pretty soon, the business model that optometry is based on is going to have to change. It's not sustainable. And they have to find other ways of earning a living, because they're just going to collapse. And they're concerned about that. The last optometry conference I was at was in the Netherlands last October. And they are worried that they're going to have to change. They're going to have to do things differently, because the internet is offering what they do at a fraction of the price, even diagnosing. You know?
Yeah, I've been
So
seeing some
it's
new
all
like
going to
apps.
collapse fairly soon, and you know, it's just a matter of time when all that changes. But it's good for us to become really effective in what we do, to offer a good alternative to what's out there in the optometry world, because people are looking for it. People are wanting the natural solutions, and they want things that really work, not the, you know, the Mickey Mouse exercises that so many people are, no, that's what they're familiar with. You know, you hear about, oh, you can improve your eyesight. The first thing people think about is these Mickey Mouse eye exercises of moving your eyes all over the place. And then that doesn't help, and they're disappointed, and they say, oh, it doesn't work. I'll just go get the glasses.
Right.
Well, if we can be that change that says, no, don't do those silly eye exercises, really learn what your problem is, find the underlying strain, and then work with that. It's there, it's easy to find, it's not that hard for us to help you point that out. And then you can work with it and change it, and you'll see those cylinders and those sphere numbers drop down. And you know, that's the future of vision care, and that's where I want us all to go. And that's why I want to teach the teachers about this, you know, everything that I've learned over the 18 years I've been in this field, because I started out as, you know, the typical, not quite eye exercise level teacher, but still I didn't know a huge amount of things about the various eye strains. I didn't know how to solve them. Most people I couldn't help. There was a few that I had success with, and then a whole lot I didn't. And that was so frustrating to me. And it took years to figure out why I wasn't successful and what was the actual reason, and how Bates did it so differently, why Bates was so much more successful than me or just about every eyesight teacher out there. Why was Bates so incredibly more successful? And like, as you learn that, as you find out what he did differently, you're going, oh my God, that's not what I was taught. And you have to change. You have to change at some point and do what Bates did or something similar. And of course, Bates had his own hang-ups and his own little mistakes. And he didn't know about astigmatism the way Forrest later learned. So as you go back to Bates, but then apply what's been known, you know, what's been discovered since then, and become a more holistic method, modern holistic method, based on Bates's work, standing on his shoulders, so to speak, but reaching out much further than he could, because we've got so much more technology at our fingertips. And the research is just so easy to get to now. So as we delve deeper, we can help people so much better than the teachers before us could. And so it becomes our responsibility, I think, to change that the eye care world, to change the eye care world into something much more holistic, much more nature-based, and much more effective in how it cares for the eyes. That's my dream for the future. And I think that's what we do. That we help people think about their vision in a different way. And slowly but surely, one pupil at a time, as Tom used to say, we can change the world.
Nice. I like that. Yeah. Hopefully you've succeeded in changing how a lot of people think about astigmatism after listening to this, because even the word itself can instill confusion and fear sometimes. And yeah, if people just understand, sort of simplify it in their mind of what it is, what's causing it, and what they can do about it, I think that's extremely empowering. One last quick thing that I meant to bring up earlier, just kind of popped back in my mind, was more of the personality traits that sometimes are associated with astigmatism. And I remember reading at some point how astigmatism can be connected with indecisiveness or self-doubt or lack of self-confidence. When you have astigmatism in your eyes, you literally see double sometimes. You see more than one of a single object. So you're not sure which one is the real one and which is the fake one or the astigmatic one. Mm-hmm. And that can, on a deeper level, that can instill this feeling of not being sure which path to take in your life or which decision to make. And that resonated with me so much, because I used to be extremely indecisive. It was probably terrible to go out to a restaurant with me, because it took me so long to pick what I was going to order for dinner.
Oh, wow.
Or going shopping somewhere, I could not decide on which shirt to buy or shoes to buy. Like it was probably terrible to go shopping with me. But
Mm.
once I was like, oh, there could be a connection in that personality trait that I have and the way that I'm seeing. And so I tried to become more decisive and sort of go with my gut more and not second guess my decision so much. Just go with the green shirt or go with that entree or whatever, and just let it happen, go with it. Maybe the people listening, that makes sense for them. Maybe not, it doesn't always apply, but
Yeah, it tends to apply to just myopia in general too. I think the insecure feeling,
mhm,
inadequate feeling,
yeah.
myopes have that a lot, just the same. Part of the blurry vision is giving you that feeling of, there's something wrong with me, right?
Mhm.
Um, I'm deficient in some way, right? And that gives us a lot of emotional, mental issues to work on.
And unfortunately, when you put the glasses on, a lot of that stuff gets kind of swept under the rug.
Yeah, yeah, it's like putting on your brave face along with your glasses, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I write about that in my new book too. I'm in the final stages of finishing another book, and this one is about myopia and astigmatism.
Oh,
Mm.
cool.
So
Well, that
I'm
might be a
looking forward
nice
to
little
doing that one.
accompaniment to some of the stuff we talked about today. Do you know when that's going to be available?
Hopefully this summer.
Cool.
I'm kind of in the last part of cleaning up. It's already had a first edit,
Hmm.
and the first edit came back to me just before the fire happened. So for months
Mm.
I didn't look at the book at all because it was
Yeah,
so
it's
much
kind of been on
going
hold.
on. Yeah, so at the beginning of February, I finally picked it up again and
Nice.
started cleaning up that edited first draft.
Oh,
And
very
it's
cool.
coming along nicely. I'm more than halfway through that, and love how it's looking now. So I just about 10 chapters still to clean up, and then indexing it and doing the illustrations, stuff like that.
Awesome.
And then it'll be done. And it'll be yay! No more book writing.
Yeah, for now. Yeah. Yeah, you've got a lot of good, really wonderful resources people should check out. I would say probably the one that I reference the most at this point is your Bates Method Nuggets book, the collection of the Better Eyesight magazine gems and jewels that we were talking about before.
Yes.
Uh, those are really nice. But
So,
yeah, I want to thank you so much for chatting with me today and explaining astigmatism and just letting us know a little bit more about who you are and what you do. And people should definitely go check out your website and spend a lot of time on there because there's a lot of stuff to read and to see and to listen to and check out.
yeah.
So
visionsofjoy.org or .com. It'll get you there too. But
either way,
thanks, Nathan. I'm really glad you invited me to this interview. I'm glad you're doing this work. So, like I say, the more the merrier. We need everyone, and you're doing great. You've not been in this field very long, but you're really reaching out to many people, and it's good to see that. Thank you.
absolutely. Well, thank you again, and I'll speak with you soon.
Okay. Bye bye.